In December 2018, a 30-year-old man died in a hospital in Jaipur, India, 9 days after signing his will. He was on his honeymoon. He was also the only human being on Earth who could open the vaults of Canada's largest cryptocurrency exchange. When he died, the passwords died with him, and $190 million belonging to 76,000 people was sealed away forever. That was the story the world was told. Almost none of it was true. This is the story of Gerald Cotten, QuadrigaCX, and the empty vaults behind a dead man's password. Gerald Cotten did not look like a man who would take $250 million to the grave. Colleagues describe a cheerful, boyish figure who flew small planes and talked about financial freedom. He seemed to have arrived from nowhere. He hadn't. Years before Quadriga, as a teenager, Cotten was already active on internet forums dedicated to high-yield investment programs, a polite name for Ponzi schemes. He learned the machinery of taking deposits, paying fake returns, and disappearing before he was old enough to rent a car. On those same forums, he met a partner, a man calling himself Michael Patron. Together, in 2013, they founded QuadrigaCX in Vancouver, a friendly Canadian on-ramp for a strange new thing called Bitcoin. The timing was perfect. As Bitcoin exploded from hundreds of dollars to nearly 20,000, ordinary Canadians rushed in, and Quadriga became the country's biggest exchange. At its peak, it processed hundreds of millions of dollars a year. In the early days, Quadriga looked like the future arriving politely. There was a Bitcoin ATM and a Vancouver coffee shop. There were plans to list the company on a Canadian stock exchange, with lawyers and filings and the whole costume of legitimacy. Then, quietly, the listing was abandoned. The other directors drifted away, and the costume came off. By 2016, the entire corporate structure had dissolved down to a single person. And here is the part that should have terrified every customer. There was no company behind it, no office, no accountants, no board. Quadriga was, functionally, one man with an encrypted laptop, running the treasury of an entire exchange from wherever he happened to be sitting. Cotten told everyone this was security. The coins, he said, lived in cold wallets, offline vaults that no hacker could touch, and only he held the keys. Customers found it reassuring. It should have been a fire alarm. In 2018, the walls began closing in. Banks, always suspicious of crypto, froze tens of millions of dollars of Quadriga's funds. Withdrawals slowed to a crawl, complaints piled up, and Gerald Cotten, newly married, updated his estate planning. On November 27, 2018, he signed a will distributing his assets, his properties, his plane, even a provision for his 2 chihuahuas. It said nothing about exchange passwords. 12 days later, he and his wife Jennifer landed in Jaipur, India, on their honeymoon. That night, he was admitted to a private hospital with complications from Crohn's disease. Within 24 hours, doctors declared him dead. He was 30. The death certificate spelled his name wrong. The body was embalmed within days, flown home to Nova Scotia, and buried after a closed casket service arranged with unusual speed. For a month, the exchange said nothing. Users deposited money into a platform whose owner was already buried. When Quadriga finally announced the death in January 2019, it made an admission that stopped the crypto world cold. The cold wallets were locked in Cotten's head, and 76,000 creditors were owed roughly $190 million that no one could reach. The internet did what the internet does. Within days, amateur investigators were pulling at the story's threads, and the threads came loose fast. Court-appointed investigators from Ernst & Young hired experts to crack into Cotten's laptop and identify the famous cold wallets. They found 6 of them. And when they finally looked inside, the wallets were not locked treasure chests. They were empty. Almost all of them had been drained in April 2018, 8 months before Gerald Cotten died. The money had not been sealed away by death. It had left the building while its keeper was alive. Then Ontario's securities regulator delivered the autopsy of the business itself. Quadriga, it concluded, had become a fraud. Cotten had created fake accounts under aliases, credited them with imaginary millions, and used them to trade against his own customers. One alias alone was credited with hundreds of millions of dollars that never existed. Real deposits went out the back door to cover fake balances, to trade on rival exchanges, and to fund a life of planes, properties, and a yacht. Think about what that means for the famous locked vault. When a customer bought Bitcoin on Quadriga, there was often no Bitcoin behind the number on their screen. They were buying a row in Gerald Cotten's database, exactly like the victims of OneCoin, Exactly like Madoff's clients admiring statements printed on the 17th floor. The password that died in Jaipur was never guarding their money. It was guarding the truth. It was, the regulator wrote, an old-fashioned Ponzi scheme wearing a blockchain costume. Bitcoin didn't invent the crime. It just gave it a new lock for the vault and a perfect story for why the vault could never be opened. And the partner? Investigative journalists revealed that Michael Patron was a legal alias of a man convicted in the United States for identity fraud and running an online criminal marketplace. He denied everything, left the story, and resurfaced years later in the world of decentralized finance under a new name. Which brings us back to the hospital in Jaipur, and the question nobody can put down. Did Gerald Cotten really die? The circumstances invite doubt. A young man with a freshly signed will, a fatal illness that rarely kills within a day, a jurisdiction where documentation can be arranged, a name misspelled on the death certificate, a closed casket funeral back in Nova Scotia, and $190 million unaccounted for. In December 2019, lawyers for the creditors formally asked Canadian police to exhume the body and confirm both identity and cause of death, citing the need for certainty. The exhumation has never happened. The RCMP has never confirmed what, if anything, lies in that grave. His widow, who insists she watched him die, surrendered most of the estate, around $12 million, saying she had no idea where the customer's money went. She kept her wedding ring and started over. The wreckage drew scavengers and saints alike. Arrival Exchange's founder put up a $100,000 reward for information and publicly walked through the blockchain evidence. Streaming services turned the saga into documentaries. And on the creditor forums, thousands of ordinary people compared losses, students who had parked tuition on the platform, retirees who had moved pensions into Bitcoin at the top. One man who lost close to $500,000 and spent years leading the fight to open the grave. Investigators eventually clawed back some assets, and creditors received a fraction of what they were owed. The rest is scattered across old blockchain addresses, foreign exchanges, and whatever Gerald Cotten spent it on while everyone believed the money was sleeping safely in cold storage. The blockchain, they say, never forgets. Every coin Quadriga ever moved is still visible on the public ledger, a permanent map of the crime. What the blockchain cannot show is whether the man who drew that map is lying in a Nova Scotia grave or sitting on a beach somewhere, 30-something and rich, reading about his own death. Some investors want the coffin opened. It never has been. Until it is, the QuadrigaCX story ends the way the best money mysteries always end, with a locked box, a missing fortune, and a question. Where did the money go? And did the only man who knew really take it to the grave? Follow Where Money Dies for the fortunes history tried to bury.